Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, this is the Question Guy podcast. My name is Dr. Keith McNally, and I'm here with Liz Keable. And Liz, it's good to have you back on the show. And so, just as a background, Liz, you were here, um, I guess, a couple months ago, and we talked about what you're currently doing in the world, and that's helping learners in your region, at the very least, understand the value of metacognition and its impact on their learning. And
hmm
I asked for you to come back because at this point in the game, we're here it's late November. We just had Thanksgiving here in America. And we're coming down to the end of the calendar year. And you've done so much. And I say that because I follow you religiously on LinkedIn, and I think almost weekly you write an article on
Yeah.
metacognition, and you have a lot of momentum going, and there's lots more information that people need to be aware of, and we're going to have that conversation today, right?
Yeah. And lovely.
Cool.
Thank you very much for having me back.
Well, you're always welcome. And so, are you ready to get started? Because I've got a list of questions that are
Yeah.
focused on what we need to tell people.
Yeah. Fine.
Okay,
Go ahead.
let's get started. So, my first question is this, and it's going to be simple because I always need to have a better understanding. But what is metacognition? Now, again, I know we did this on the first video, the first conversation, because it's thinking about thinking, but I know that you know it so much more. What is
Mhm.
metacognition?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that puts some people off using it because seems like a foreign word. So why would you bother with it? But if you break it up into the two main parts, the second part is cognition. And cognition is really boils down to the ability to learn. So it's gaining the knowledge that you need, understanding what it is you're learning, and then being able to use it. So that's basic metacognition. And that's something we all have from birth onwards. So it's a natural learning process. But if you stick the word meta on the front, then you're turning attention on itself. So the meta on the front of anything is turning attention to what follows. So we're turning attention to the cognition, which means going beyond. So you can also translate it as going beyond, rising above, transcending cognition. So instead of thinking about the actual learning itself, we're thinking about how that learning is happening. So it's about rummaging around inside your own head, checking what you find there, taking responsibility for what you find there, and then deciding whether it needs changing or not, depending on the results you're looking for. So it's
So,
very much, sorry, go
so,
on.
so, and I'm thinking of this at, at a very elementary level. And so we teach young learners 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 2 = 4. And that's the content of learning. But how we go about how somebody goes about understanding that concept
Yeah,
is really what you're talking about. Am I
yeah.
kind of close?
The metacognition, yeah. The
Okay.
most important aspect of it is being able to change your mind. So if you're not getting the result that you want in anything, it can be in life, let alone in a maths, the answer to a maths question. If you're not getting the result you want, you have to change something inside your head to
Okay.
get where you want to go. And that's what metacognition is, that ability to change. That actually the significance of that came out in a study in 2018. I've never been able to pronounce or remember the names of the scientists involved, so my apologies to them because they're Chinese. So the names were all foreign anyway to me to be able to pronounce them. But they were looking for some separate entity, some part of the brain that they could label it and say, this is where metacognition is taking place. This is the piece of the brain that's responsible for metacognition. And they couldn't find one. But the conclusion that they came to following their study was that it is part of the decision-making processes of the brain. So we're talking about something that's happening here behind the forehead in the part of the brain known as the prefrontal cortex.
Okay.
And that's where our reasoning skills are. That's where our decision-making skills are. And so metacognition, they know is part of that. And that obviously means it's very important for adult life, because if you think about it, our adult lives are the cumulative result of all the decisions that we have made for ourselves.
Right, right.
And so being able to make those decisions is actually really, really important. And if we apply it then back into school, then it helps students to work independently, because they can make their own mind up about things, and they can recognize when they need to change what they're thinking. So that's kind of how it gets applied in schools, and becomes really important because we've got universities and employers complaining about the fact that young people are turning up unable to think for themselves. They're waiting to be told what to do and how to do it. I actually had somebody mention this the other day, even in relation to teacher training, that when they used to train teachers, that they were like on fire with ideas. She'd say, "Oh, give them a question," and off they'd go. And now she gives them a question, and it's now, "So what is it you're looking for? What is it you want us to do?" That kind of hesitation. They're just not prepared to think for themselves and just go with the flow on thinking. So it's something that has become an issue, and that, as I said, universities and employers are all complaining about.
So go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
because I was going to say, to fix the problem as an adult, we really have to start at a young age.
Exactly. You're where I'm coming from, Keith.
Okay.
That's my point
And
in time.
I'm assuming the younger the better. And I don't know how young is. I think we talked about this in our first conversation. Young may be as early as 7 or 8, or am I?
Yeah. A child's reasoning skills kick in to more effect at about the age of 7.
Okay.
So you
So
can
we could
do
start
things.
applying
Yeah.
your model to
Yeah.
what? Second grade students.
Yeah. And you can start younger by, I'll talk a bit later on about how you develop metacognition, and you can start developing metacognition in younger children even.
Okay.
But there's going to be a limit to how well they can use their thought processes before the age of 7. But yes, you can start quite young.
Well, one of the things that kind of popped in my head when you were talking was, there's this kind of adage, or the saying, that the definition of insanity, and this is for adults, is that we do the same thing over and over again, but we expect different results.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so I think that kind of mirrors what you were saying, in terms of, well, if we're not thinking about, if we're not transcending our thoughts and our learning, we're always going to be repeating our patterns, because we don't know how to change what you said. I think that was a significant word: change the way we do things.
Yeah, and if you think about it, there are a lot of adults who continue to make poor decisions for themselves and don't have particularly happy lives as a result of the decisions that they've made. So it's a life skill. And as you say, the younger we start, the better. And
So,
part of the problem, go
well,
on.
go ahead, go ahead.
So part of the problem is the school system, because we expect them to come to school and then sit still and be quiet and be taught. And
Right.
so they become passive recipients of information. And you've got kind of people who complain about the system, quite rightly, that it needs a complete overhaul, that we need to change the way in which we teach children and young people. But that's an argument that's been raging for years and years. And my concern is that while we argue about that, and while we try and push for changes in education, the current cohorts of students are going through that. They're living it day in, day out, month in, month out, year in, year out. We have to concentrate on helping them to survive and thrive within the education system as it is, because however much we want it to be different, it's how it is at the moment. So that for me, my main concern is helping the students who are currently going through that system to be more successful as a result of being able to think differently.
If we're starting as early as we possibly can, that means, at least in my head, that you may need to start with the parents rather than the schools or the teachers.
Yeah,
Am I making a right assumption?
No, it's a really good place to start.
So
And I'll
how
give you some.
how do you do that? How do you work with parents to kind of maybe help with that skill set?
Yeah, it's a really good question. If you think about when children are younger, before they ever go to school, they are already really good learners. They have that natural cognition, and they learn to walk, they learn to talk, they learn to do loads of things completely, well, say completely independently, almost independently. If you leave them to it, they'll still do it. They'll still learn to talk as long as they can hear other people talking and you talk to them. So they are learning in an unconscious way at that point. So when they're small, preschool, most of their learning is unconscious, and it's mostly from natural curiosity. Children learn a huge amount just from being curious about the environment that they're in, and they will learn a huge amount from that. And then the problem, of course, is that we put them into school.
Well, how can
suddenly,
well, before you get to school, how can parents really help with that experiential? I guess that's what it is. Experiential and environmental learning. Is there something that parents could? Because I'll be honest, I wouldn't mind getting my 12-year-old daughter back into a framework where she really wants to be inquisitive again. And because I think you're right, even here in America, it's like, and I don't want to, and I kind of want to blame social media, especially YouTube, because there's so much attraction to just watch something, and there's the whole are kids getting too much screen time, which is not this conversation, but as a parent, I kind of want some tidbits of information to say, Keith, you should be doing this with your daughter. So what can parents do?
Well, I think it's useful to keep in mind that if a child is going to develop metacognition and be able to think metacognitively, then there are 3 prerequisites. And the first one is that they have to have a positive self-concept. So they have to believe in themselves, both as an individual and as a learner. The second thing is that they have to understand how learning happens. You can't change your learning if you don't know how it's happening in the first place. And thirdly, they need to understand what their role is, that they have a role to play, that they are not passive recipients. So that's where parents can start the process. So the first thing, if you think about that, building a positive self-concept, so a child has a belief in themselves and their own ability, we have to be careful as parents what we say to them and about them, about themselves. Because we don't want to do anything that contributes to a negative self-concept. And sometimes we will talk about children when we think they're not listening. And that's a mistake a lot of parents have made. They think they're asleep, they think they're in the other room, but in fact they can hear you. The children often hear things that you don't want them to hear. So we have to be very careful, both when talking to them and about them, that we keep it very, very positive. The other thing that parents can do is to be careful what you model. Because if as a parent we start saying, oh, I was rubbish at school, I've never been good at maths and things like that, the child will automatically start thinking, oh, I'm going to be rubbish at school, I'm not going to be good at maths, because they will copy whatever the parent models. So we have to be careful about what we say to them about ourselves and our own experiences as well. So that's kind of another way to keep in mind that you model a positive view of learning.
That makes sense.
Ability. Yeah.
And then finally you talk, they need to take some ownership and responsibility for that.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We'll think about that again in a minute.
Sure. Well, can we transition to schools then? Because schools have a lot of.
Can I give you some more for parents stuff?
Yeah, I would love to know, because again, I want to do some things differently.
Yeah, no, there's more to come for parents, don't worry. The other thing is a positive view of school. That, even if we think the school is a bad school or we're not happy with the school, we don't transfer that to our children. They have to go there. They have to spend all day, every day in that building or with those people. And so we don't want to put a negative spin on their daily experiences, if you like, so that they don't have a wrong view of what they're going to experience. And also a positive view of their ability, having expectations that they are able to fulfill the requirements that the school has for them. And one of the ways of doing that is you can find out, especially by the time they get to your daughter's age, you often don't know what they're thinking. It's much easier when they're younger. But in conversation, you need to invite them to talk about their experiences. And you don't need to comment on it. Just listen out for the words that they use when they describe themselves in their own experiences. Because you'll often hear them say things like, oh, I'm rubbish at this, or I can never get that right. Or you can listen out for what they say about themselves when they're talking about the experiences that they've had. And the other thing there, of course, is don't let them have any limitations. They will often put limitations on themselves. Sometimes parents put limitations on them, say, oh, you're not going to be able to do that. You'll never achieve that. Right. And we don't want to do that. If they have a limitation, if there is literally something that is holding them back, then we need to help them overcome that and not use it as an excuse and say, well, yeah, well, you're not going to be able to do that because we want to always say, okay, so that's an issue. How are we going to overcome that? How are we going to help you to do your best despite that difficulty? The other thing we said was that they also need to understand how learning happens. So even something as simple as explaining to them that learning is what goes on through our five senses, that your five senses are working all day, every day, feeding information to your brain, and your brain is literally making sense of that. And that's what learning is. It's just the brain making sense of what's coming in through the five senses. And that kind of simplifies learning for children who tend to think that learning is something really difficult. It's not. It's what's going in through their five senses. And the other thing that can help as well, particularly with young ones, is that we said that they learn naturally through their own experience when they're younger. And when they get into school, it suddenly changes to a different way of learning where they're being taught. It's not their own curiosity at all. They're being told what to learn and how to learn it. And so it feels very different. And I think just warning them about that when they get into school, they won't be, I mean, some early years teaching allows the children to play and to experience and carry on learning in that same way. But sometimes they will be taught, and that will feel different and it will feel uncomfortable. And that's something else that as parents we can help them understand, is what the comfort zone is all about. Is that we all need a comfort zone when we're feeling unwell or scared or angry, all those emotions. We need one to feel safe, but if we stay there, we never learn anything. There's no learning in the comfort zone. So we have to help them understand that new learning will sometimes feel uncomfortable because they have to push out of their comfort zone in order to be prepared to learn. So that idea of learning sometimes feeling uncomfortable because it's new. That's why it's learning. It's new stuff we've not come across before. If it's not new, then we're not learning, are we? So and I think the other three things that youngsters are often not familiar with, which is part of the learning process, is the idea of challenge. That learning is all about challenge because it's new and different. And then making mistakes, engaging with that challenge and making mistakes, and then practicing in order to master it. And those are three very simple things that students often avoid. They run away from challenge. They're afraid of making mistakes. They think they should get it right first time, and they back off if they don't because they're afraid of practice. Whereas in fact, those are three really important aspects of learning. So I would encourage children to learn to make mistakes and be comfortable making mistakes. I think it was one other thing I was going to say on that one. Oh yeah, the idea of taking responsibility as well. If we don't allow our children to take responsibility at home, then they won't take responsibility for their learning in school. So they need to know what responsibility feels like. And if you want one thing that's going to help them enormously, is don't let them use the word can't. Not I can't do this because you're telling the brain that you can't do it. Your subconscious brain will believe everything you tell it. So if you tell it I can't, it will believe you and you won't be able to. So we have to tell them not to use that word. And that can feel like a lie, because if you then start saying I can, but you feel like you can't, it still feels wrong. So we just need to change that to I can do this. I just need some help.
So it needs to have a follow-up. I can do this with
and then you
practice.
help them work. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Or if I get help from the teacher, or if
Okay.
if my mate who knows this better than I do, I can find out from them. But just get that idea of that you can do things. You just need to put a bit more effort into it and find a way around it. I think that's a really important attitude that's going to help youngsters in school to take more responsibility for their own learning and feel more comfortable with being uncomfortable
Yeah.
in some situations in school.
Yeah, especially as they grow older,
Yeah,
the content is challenging enough in itself. And so really giving your brain this the permission, and I like using that word,
yeah,
the
yeah,
permission to fail in order to be successful, because it's going to be repetition, it's going to take time, it's going to take practice. Um, Nobody gets it right the first time.
yeah,
So that transitions into what happens at school.
yeah,
And so how can school leaders really approach the idea that there isn't just content learning, there should be there should be an application around metacognition
yeah.
in the classroom? How does that work with school leaders?
Yeah, I think it's really important that leaders look at the idea of developing metacognition in their students. A few years ago, we had a report in the UK from the Education Endowment Foundation that recommended metacognition. It pointed out that metacognition is one of the most successful ways to improve student progress.
Mm.
At the same time, it acknowledged that it's difficult to implement. And the reason for that is that it's all about what's going on inside each learner's head. So if you've got hundreds of learners who've all got different stuff going on inside their heads, it seems like an almighty challenge. And so you've got schools that think, yeah, sounds great, but they kind of back off a bit because it just seems too big a challenge. But the important thing is that you have a whole school approach, which is why I think it's important. It's the school leaders who pay attention to this, that you don't want it being led by one member of staff. I mean, it can be led by a member of staff, but with the backing of the management of the school.
Okay.
So it's led from the top, but you don't want one enthusiastic teacher trying to make that change all by themselves, which is often what happens. So it needs to be built into policy and practice, and there needs to be an implementation plan, so that all staff are included in training, and to my mind, the inclusion of parents as well.
Okay.
Because if they understand what the school's trying to achieve and they understand what metacognition is, then obviously they're going to be able to do some of the things that we've already mentioned at home and make it easier for their children in school. One of the important things I think when it comes to thinking about school is that you don't need to use the word metacognition. Right? Some
How can you
schools,
not if you're going to put it in policy?
yeah. Well, you can in the policy, but
Okay,
not to
okay,
the students. Yes, you'd mention it in it that as a school, we're now going to focus
okay.
on metacognition, but there's no need to use that word with the students. And the other term that is often used that I think doesn't express it very well is this thinking about thinking,
Which
because
was what I said earlier. Yeah.
yeah, it's the common translation of that term. But the problem is that it's so much further than that. If you remember those three prerequisites that we mentioned, they
Mhm.
have to have a sense of self. You can think about thinking as an academic exercise or a philosophical exercise without ever including your own thoughts in there, because in fact, this is all about your thoughts. So it's way beyond thinking about thinking. So I wouldn't use that term either.
Okay.
And I think the important thing for schools even is to develop those three prerequisites first. The idea of making sure that the students have a strong belief in their own ability to learn, that they understand what the learning process is, and that they are know that they are involved, that they have a part to play in that. Because what tends to happen is schools think, right, we've got to do metacognition, and they suddenly introduce all these templates for the students
Mm.
that are related to asking themselves questions. The most popular one is when they're planning, monitoring, or evaluating their work. So there's a set of questions for when you're planning, and then there's another set of questions to ask yourself when you're monitoring how you're doing while you're doing it. And then there's another set of questions for evaluating how well you've done afterwards. Now, that's quite sophisticated thinking. And so many students are not ready. If they were confused before you introduce those templates, they will remain confused. It's not going to help students who don't have those other prerequisites that we were talking about. So I think what you need to do in a school is to change that ethos of students being passive recipients, that they are involved, that it's all about them and what they are thinking. And if you can get that right first across the school, then you can start making students more responsible for their own learning. And then you can start introducing the templates and so on, because they understand what's going on. And you can do all of that without using the word metacognition and without referring to thinking about thinking.
I've been a college professor, and I just kind of want to support what you're saying, but taking out of the lower grades and put it into college. And I remember when I first went to college a long, long time ago, back in the 90s, 1990s and not the 1890s, is that, and even then it's content learning. It's you're going to do this and I'm going to teach you, and that perpetuates into college. And even in college it's worse, because you could be really good at high school. I mean, you could not like the super geniuses that are that are a small population of high school, but I did pretty good. I got my A's and my B's, and then I went into college and I didn't do well. Because now literally like you just said, the responsibility is now on me to learn it. It wasn't somebody saying, well, here's the list of questions that you need to answer. No, it was, here's the book. I'm going to lecture 3 times a week. You learn what you want to learn, and then I'm going to test you. And it's like, that kind of blew me out of the water.
And there's the problem, because children should be taught to be responsible for their own learning at a much younger age, so that when they get to that situation, they know exactly what to do.
And so, I totally concur with you. So how does that work in the classroom? How can we, now that we've got leadership support and a whole school approach, something has to happen in the classroom. What happens in the classroom?
Yeah, the teachers obviously are responsible for the learning environment that you get in any classroom. And we've already said that children learn perfectly naturally through their own experience. So what's really important is that the teacher provides experiences for the students, which come much more naturally. You don't want a class of students with the teacher throwing information at them and hoping that it sticks. What we need to think about really is kind of engaging the whole brain. I'm always encouraging teachers to think of their students as a set of floating brains, because you don't want to be just looking at their uniforms and the way they're sitting and the way they're behaving and what they're doing. What you're trying to engage with is what's going on inside their heads. So if you picture them as a group of floating brains, and that's what you're trying to get to, then you need to think about engaging that whole brain. So you want lessons that arouse curiosity in the first instance. We haven't got time here today, but I've got lots of things that I used to do to arouse curiosity that in the courses that I run. I explain some of those. You have to build interaction of some kind, so they're not just sitting there passively. They have to be involved in some way or another with what's going on, and that doesn't just mean answering questions from a book or off a worksheet. And one of the really important things is to engage their emotions as well, because stronger memory traces are created if we are completely involved in an experience and it includes emotions. So, and I'm not talking about upsetting them.
No, I hope not.
or getting them angry. I'm talking about just building in activities that make them think in a way that it maybe in a more challenging way, kind of dilemmas, if you like, or getting them to imagine that they are something. So what if you were this character from history? What would you have done under those circumstances? Or how would you feel if this character came and said what they said to that character? Do you know what I mean? Just kind of build in some emotions so that the memory that's created from that is much stronger than just from being told or shown. Again, there's so many examples I could give you, and scientific research I could give you that we don't have the time to go into. But
you do have a website.
I do.
Okay,
yeah, although they're not on there either.
What's that?
I'll tell you about they're not on there, but these things all come into the training that I do. So I'll tell you about the training at the end. How about that?
Well, I want people to connect with you so they can learn about the training.
Yeah. Well, if I tell you at the end.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so then I'll explain what people can access if they want to.
So it doesn't end with school administration or school leaders, and it continues with the teachers and the classroom environment, and it is supported by the parents, but that's not everything. There are support staff in schools that that really can make a positive impact
There
on how
are.
learning takes place. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because that's not something we really ever really think about, is the support staff and how impactful they can be.
Yeah. Oh, have we got time to come back to that in a minute? Because I've got a bit more that we can do for teachers first. Is that because
Yeah,
what the
yeah.
teachers do impacts on what the support staff
Oh, okay.
are able to do.
So
So are
so
you okay if I
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the fact that one of the things that can really help from a classroom point of view is the teacher being careful what they praise. Praise and reward often goes to the students who work quietly, do neat work, complete their work, hand it in on time, get all the answers correct.
Mhm.
But the truth is, those students have learnt nothing. Right? They've put in a neat piece of work, but they've learned nothing. The students who are learning are those that are not working quietly. They're not doing the work neatly because there's lots of crossing out because they're changing their mind about what's correct and what isn't. They often don't get done because they don't get finished in time because they're thinking more deeply about the piece of work and they're talking about it with the people around them. And they are much more challenging students because they are thinking for themselves. And yet they're the ones that often get are not rewarded and in fact can get into trouble for talking and for not finishing their work and for their work not being neat. I have seen teachers throw a piece of work back at a child and say, do that again, it's not neat enough. And I'm
Mm.
thinking, what are you doing? It doesn't matter how neat the piece of work is. And it doesn't matter how, this is something that impacts on support staff. It doesn't matter to me that they've got the date neatly underlined at the top and their title is correct. Because some teachers will wait 20 minutes for a child with learning difficulties to do that. And
Oh,
meantime, they're not learning anything. They're just waiting for them to have and I'm thinking, please let them learn. Don't be so pedantic about the expectation of neat work. Sorry,
all
it's
right.
me on my hobby horse about that
No,
one.
that's okay
But
because go ahead. Yeah, that's
the
perfect.
it's important to me that a teacher makes the classroom a learning community where you've got all the thinking is open and out loud because everybody's contributing and then you can have everybody's best guesses, you can have everybody's creative ideas. So you don't want the questions being factual ones where the teacher asks a factual question and expects a correct answer from a student. Again, that's not helping the whole class to learn. You want to help the whole class work it out between them rather than telling them. So you've got to kind of create that atmosphere where challenge is expected and welcomed by the students, where mistakes are part of the process. The students recognize the need to make mistakes and everybody's making contribution. Everybody's contribution is valued and where practice again is an integral part of the learning. And you can have people working with study buddies or in groups and create this kind of no fear, no stress
Mhm.
environment where everybody is learning together. And then at that point, you can start modeling the questions that people insist is important for metacognition, because you can start asking yourself questions. You can say, put something on a board and say, oh, have I got that right? Or what could I do to change that? Just so they hear you asking those kind of questions and then get them to start answering those questions for you. And then you can encourage them to ask themselves those questions. And then eventually you get to the point where when they say, oh, miss, what about this? You go, oh, now hold on. What questions should you be asking yourself at this point? Because they've learned it. You've gone through that whole process and you've not thrown them in at the deep end, as it were. And you've got the whole class environment geared up to that thinking differently and being able to change their minds on things, which all affects what the support staff can do because they're dependent on how the teacher has set things up in the classroom, obviously. So
So
sorry, I
so
just thought
Go ahead.
Throw in all those extras for the teachers.
No, and that's good. And everything that you say, I kind of my brain just goes, well, this can be applicable to like a job interview, or this can be applicable
Hmm.
to, a corporate meeting. Because if you do it right and you know what you're doing, you can subtly talk about stuff without it feeling strange, awkward, or whatever synonym I'm looking for, in the context of what it needs to be. And then you
Yeah,
could explore ideas and you could explore learning where people feel, and this is, I'm going to use your word, safe and comfortable in that environment without them, so that they can kind of start, offering ideas,
yeah,
offering suggestions, using well, maybe, and even talk in contrast. And I'm even at a loss for
yeah,
words, bringing
yeah,
up an idea that's different than what's being discussed,
yeah,
and not feel that they're not trying to be antagonistic. They're actually just broadening the scope of the conversation. And so
yeah,
I love, that's why I love having conversations with you, because you talk about the things that I actually just apply in my own environments. And I don't use the word metacognition
yeah.
because, and even in my conversations I don't, but I know that that's what's going on. So
Can I just say as well, I mean, you summarized that really well there in what you were saying, and you used a word that is really useful in that situation, I think, is subtle.
okay,
That there is
yeah,
no need to throw students in at the deep end, that you
yeah.
can subtly, as you pointed out, gradually develop it to the point where it comes quite naturally as part of the process in school.
And that would be so like just a paradigm shift in how the,
Yeah,
the classroom works.
yeah,
So before we go on, can you we mentioned it earlier and you kind of started hinting to it, support staff. So
yeah.
define who or what is support staff in the classroom.
Yeah, I'm not sure how this would be in other countries, but in the UK, we have teaching assistants, learning assistants, people who support either an individual learner with a specific difficulty to help them access the curriculum.
Okay, we have teaching assistants in
Yeah,
America.
yeah, so it's the similar thing. Or sometimes they'll work with a small group of students who are struggling to try and help them to catch up with the rest of the
Well, we
group.
have what we consider special education, and I hate that word,
Mm,
but those are the learners who have challenges,
yeah, yeah.
whatever they may, cognitive, behavioral, whatever.
Yeah. So this kind of covers all kinds of support stuff, whatever the level of support that they are providing, because it's all about, for them, it's all about communication. It's the way that they are communicating with those learners who have difficulties. Often students who have some kind of difficulty end up very dependent on their learning assistant or on their support staff. And I've seen it time and time again where they tend to push the work over and go, you do it, to the support staff. They're expecting them to actually physically do it. And I have seen support staff members sitting there cutting and sticking things out and sticking it in the student's book
Uh,
for them to make sure that they keep up with the others, so their books look the same as everybody else's, the same work is in there, but again, they haven't learned anything. So
right.
for me, there's absolutely no point to any of that. So my plea to support staff would be, don't do it for them under any circumstances, and to have high expectations, because that's the problem with these youngsters. Nobody believes they can do it. And I know
You
from my
do,
own experience, exactly, I know from my
because you
experience,
said
the
it.
moment you start believing in a child, they will surprise you in what they can achieve. I've
Yeah.
seen it time and time again. So please keep that in mind if you are a member of support staff. I'll give you one example of the difference it can make. Was I worked with a young lad who on the very first session said to me, so am I going to be better at maths when I finished with you? And I said, it's quite likely. I said, because we're going to talk about the brain. I'm going to explain to you how your brain works. I said, and once you understand that, you will probably find maths easier. So yes, probably. Yeah, no guarantees or anything. Well, apparently he went away at the end of that session, went back into a maths lesson and became a super duper mathematician immediately because he believed that when I said by the time we finished, he thought I meant by the end of that session,
Oh my.
not by the end of the 12 weeks that I was going to be working with.
Well, then you did the magic all in one day.
Yeah, and I mean it doesn't often work like that, but that's an example of how belief can make belief is massive
Yeah.
when it comes to what we think we can achieve. And I think it's one of the things that we really need to work hard on with students, is having that belief in themselves. And I think as well, from a support staff point of view, we need to remember all the things that I said for parents about what we say to them, how we say it, that we're working at improving their self-concept, improving the belief they have in themselves. We're helping them understand how the learning process works, because they can't change what they're doing if they don't understand what's going on. And we also need them to realize that they need to be involved, and that will feel uncomfortable at times. So it's all the same things we said for parents is true for support staff as well, because again, it's a communication relationship.
Okay.
But just don't do it for them, is what I would say.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, you also said there's modeling behavior, and there's the words that you should be using versus the words that you don't use at all. And so,
Yes.
and then also engaging in their emotional well-being, telling them that they're because if you're learning and you're expected to learn something and you don't learn it the way other people are learning it, you immediately have lots of negative self-thoughts and
Yeah.
negative self-talk. And
Yeah.
that's just, for the lack of other words I want to use, that's just bad.
Yeah.
And that cripples any progress you're trying to make with them, because as soon as they say, I can't,
Yeah.
I can't, I can't, like you said earlier, the subconscious, yeah, you can't.
Yeah,
Subconscious
exactly.
totally agreeing with you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there is so much harm that we can do just by the way that we communicate with learners. But the opposite is also true.
True.
We can
Right.
build them up and improve things for them enormously by the way that we communicate with them. So it's really important to stop and think about what you're saying and how you're saying it. And as you said, modeling what you are modeling for them, because they will copy that.
Well, Liz, we've been on the call for more than 30 minutes, and that's a lot of information that you've shared with our audience, because I know you felt it valuable to share. And before we hang up the call, give us something that whoever's listening, school leaders, teachers, parents, support staff, what can they take away from this conversation right now that will inspire them to get in touch with you to learn more?
Well, hopefully what I've been able to show is that there are practical things that everybody can do. I kind of work under the banner of be in their corner, because I'm concerned about everybody working together to make sure that a child can think metacognitively. So everybody has a role to play, everybody can do things. And that's why I run webinars, workshops, and training courses to support each of those groups separately. We're just coming to the end of a series, and they'll all start again in January in that order. I work with parents first, then school leaders, then teachers, and then support staff. So through January, February, and March, there will be courses running for all those groups of people. So if anyone is interested in having the details for that, they can email me at success@lizkeable.com.
And I'll have that in the description.
LizKeable.com. Yeah, just spell the surname right, because it's EA in the middle, not two E's. So
Okay.
some people get that wrong. Or they can go to the website, LizKeable.com, and find extra information there. Or as you mentioned, there's the newsletter as well on LinkedIn. So if they want to link with me, just say that it's as a result of this call, just link with me and I'll give them the link to the first issue, and then they should find all the other issues as a result. There's 27 of them at the moment, so
And you're doing great.
Plenty of extra reading to be done there.
Yeah. And it all builds upon itself. And so I love it.
Yeah.
Liz, thank you so much for being on my show. And of course, hopefully, and I know you've got more, and I won't ask you to come back, but if you have the opportunity I always welcome the conversation. This has been another exciting edition of the Question Guy podcast. Of course, my name is Dr. Keith McNally. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye.